Hi, boys and girls. How are you? It's me again. This will be for Monday morning for social studies. This will be for Aztecs. I'm going to kind of go through the Aztec information with you. So you're going to get a crash course in these guys today. And then I have a little project that I want you guys to do. And that project I will probably let you work on until maybe Thursday or so. We do have another little group to talk about, so I'll probably push that out to you on Wednesday. But there isn't necessarily going to be, the only thing that I want you to do is I want you to make sure you turn in your Inca and Mayan chart. Okay, make sure you submit those. And then I am going to attach the Aztec and Mississippian chart. So as you are reading this, or as you're listening to this from me, you can fill in your Aztec chart as you listen. Just pause and start over. It doesn't matter. I don't care. And then when I give you the Mississippian information on Wednesday, you can fill out that chart too. So the chart doesn't actually have to be done until next weekend. So there's no rush on that at all. So this week, you're going to be working on filling out the chart for Aztec and the Mississippian, which are the other two early civilizations that we talk about in social studies. There is going to be a small little project that I want you guys to do at home, obviously. And it's not necessarily something that's required. It's something that I'm going to kind of challenge you to do, but I'm not going to explain it until at the end of this video. So you got to kind of go with me through the Aztecs with me. And then I'm going to explain my little challenge I have for you for this week. Okay. Awesome. So if there are any questions, as long as you can get all of your work in by like Sunday of the weekend, I'm totally fine. Again, guys, due dates are kind of changing. So as long as you get them submitted, I'm not going to worry about it. Just try to make sure you get things submitted. I really don't have much of due dates going on. I just want to make sure that they get turned in, okay? Sounds good. All right, so we're going to talk about the Aztecs today. And of course, I'm not at school, so I can't use my PowerPoints that I personally have made throughout the years. So I've got to rely on other PowerPoints that I find on the internet. I'm going to move my little person over here to the corner so you don't have to listen to me. But we're going to talk about a little bit about the Aztecs today. And you're going to kind of have to forgive me because, again, this is not my PowerPoint. This is somebody else's. And we're just going to kind of go through and make sure we hit all the important things about the Aztecs. So we've talked about the Incas. We've talked about the Mayans. So today is the Aztecs. Oop, hold on. Maybe. There we go. I'm still in the way. Let me put myself down there. Okay. So the Aztecs, one of the main great cities that they built was a city called Tenochtitlan. And you're looking at that word up there and you're thinking, what the heck? How do you say it? It's Tenochtitlan. And it was an island on a lake, literally. It was a very cool, elaborate city that the Aztecs built. And that was their main location. Okay, so it was their capital city. It was the most modern of their cities, and it was the one that grew the most. It was built on an island in Lake Texcoco, which is what I always call it. And it was continuously enlarged, continuously grown into as people expanded. It had a big population of a lot of people. They did have bridges. That's how the city was connected to the mainland, was with bridges or canals, causeways. They were divided into 4 districts, and I will show you a picture here in just a minute. But the modern day Mexico City now, today, is built over the ruins of Tenochtitlan. So Tenochtitlan ruins aren't necessarily around anymore. I'm sure we've got little pieces and parts to it, but the modern city of Mexico City is built on the site of Tenochtitlan. And I did it again. Here we go. This would be an example of what Tenochtitlan would look. I don't know why I did that. Okay, would look like. Again, it was a city on a lake. It was surrounded by water, and we're going to talk about how elaborate this city was here in just a few minutes, because these Aztecs, they really did come up with some very interesting ways to survive on the Lake Texcoco. All right, there definitely was warfare back in that time period, just like any of the other places that we've talked about. We don't really need to get into too much of that, but the Aztecs conquered surrounding tribes and forced them to pay large tributes, which were like taxes, very similar to the Incas and the Mayans. This allowed them to become richer. This allowed them to gain slaves. A lot of the slaves they used for sacrifices. Aztecs did the same thing, just like the Inca and the Maya. The conquered peoples were not always happy with the Aztecs, and they were easily convinced to revolt against them. So obviously, if they conquered you, there was a lot of revolting in the process. We're struggling tonight. Okay, there we go. Did I skip one? Yeah. Aztec government. At the head of the Aztec government was the emperor. Okay, so directly beneath the emperor was his advisors, who dealt with the everyday runnings of Tenochtitlan. Next was the Council of Four, and they were the military leaders. Okay, one of which would replace the emperor if he died. Noble families filled other government offices. Priests were also important, but their powers were limited. But they had to report to the Council of Four. Again, they expanded by taking over surrounding cities. That's kind of how their Aztec government worked. This was Montezuma. He was the 9th. Actually, this should be Montezuma the 2nd. I hope this is Montezuma the 2nd. I'm assuming that this is Montezuma the 2nd, which it is. It should be the 2nd. He was the 9th and the last true emperor of the Aztec emperor civilization. As a child, he studied many subjects, including science and astronomy. Religion was his favorite subject. He actually became a priest for a short time. He expanded the Aztec territory to double its previous size when he was a military leader. So by the time Montezuma became the emperor, the Aztec civilization was larger than it ever was before. And so due to that size, it was really difficult to fully control the Aztec civilization. So sometimes newly conquered tribes rebelled, like I told you, and Montezuma would swiftly and he would brutally take care of that situation. He would make sure that, whether it be a sacrifice, whether it be put to the death, he would make sure that the situation, the rebellion, was taken care of. Aztec religion, just like the Mayans and the Incas, they were polytheistic. They believed in many gods. The Aztecs worshipped hundreds of gods and goddesses. To honor their gods, the Aztecs built towering temples and sculptures. The Aztecs also offered human sacrifices to please their gods, just like the other two did as well. They had, and I'm going to apologize because the names of their gods are super duper hard to pronounce. They had a sun god. Yeah, I'm not even going to try this. It's Huitzilopochtli, was one of the most important gods in their religion. He was the sun god. He believed the sun god started out as a kind and humble god. Then he sacrificed himself in a fire to become the sun. So again, they had their own different beliefs. And I think I'm blocking one of the pictures I'm sure you want to see. Each village and each job had its own patron god. They had their own god that they worshipped. They had a lot. This says right here they had 60 gods and goddesses. Some were helpful, some were harmful. So to win favor with the gods, just like the Incas and the Aztecs, sometimes they offered human sacrifices. And you can see down there at the bottom, that is a very descriptive illustration of maybe a typical human sacrifice. Pyramids were used as temples. Sacrifices were made in an altar at the top of the pyramid. Blood would run down the steps. So boys, I'm sure you're enjoying that thought. Blech. Most sacrificial victims were prisoners of war. So they did tend to sacrifice a lot of their people that rebelled against them. Let me see if I can get it. What? We're still struggling here. Okay. Oh, here's some of the gods. Oh, here's that sun god that I have no idea how to pronounce. Wada. Yeah. Quetzalcoatl. I know that one. He's the god of learning and the priesthood. Tlak. Could be wrong. Homovaka. I could be saying that wrong too. Again, different types of gods in the Aztec civilization, just like the other ones. They had, again, an advanced civilization. They were very into mathematics. They had a mathematical system to maintain their empire. Let me see if I can find out where they talked about this. I have my book in front of me, so I'm just trying to make sure I'm not missing anything. They did have a mathematics system to maintain their empire. They had a calendar system as well to organize their empire. They had a farming system, which was very efficient. It was probably one of the best farming systems of the three that we've talked about. They did develop irrigation systems to help their crops grow during their dry periods. We're going to come back to that farming system in just a minute because it's going to be part of your challenge. This is a little bit about the Aztec calendar. They used two types of calendars. They used a lunar calendar, which was based off the moon. They used a solar, which was based off the sun. So they did have two types. The lunar calendar had 260 days. I think that's different than the Mayans. The Mayans actually, I think, had 365. So again, they're a little bit different. They were divided into 13 months. Each month had 20 days. You can kind of do the math there. The lunar calendar was considered magical and used to decide which days would be used for religious ceremonies and rituals. And, you know, those sacrifices that all the boys are probably going, yes, I can totally see it now, even though we're not in classroom. This is a little bit more about the solar calendar. The solar calendar had the 365 days. They did have 5 extra days, which they called these nothing days. And they added to the end of the year, and they were considered unlucky. So during these 5 days, there was no activities performed during the nothing days. At the end of the 5 days, the Aztecs gave a sacrificial victim to the gods. So they have these nothing days, kind of like how we feel right now. We have these nothing days going on. Here's some examples of what the calendar stones would have looked like. This would be the lunar one up here, and this one, I believe, is the solar one down here. So that, again, very similar. It looks very similar to the other two civilizations. This is how they, let me see, make sure I move myself. This is their Aztec calendar, and this is what the carvings represented. So these were all like pictures. You know, I think it was it the Mayans? Or was it the Incas? I think it was the Incas. The Incas that had the quipos and the dashes and the circles. I think that was the Incas. These guys had pictures as their symbols. So these guys were just a little bit different when it came to their hieroglyphics. They had a lot of they did a lot of sculpturing. They did a lot of art. They were really artsy civilization. So they used a lot of stone, wood, jade, turquoise, volcanic glass. Most Aztec gold treasures no longer exist as they were taken and melted down to reuse the gold. Many buildings and pieces of artwork were destroyed by the Spanish. Same thing that they did with the Mayans and the Incas. And the Aztecs also made pottery and woven cloth. So again, they did use a lot of these different things to trade with, to barter with. You can see some of the different things that they did, very similar to the other group. They did have sports. They had a ball game called Tlaloc. It was played during religious ceremonies. It was like a ball court game, just like the Mayans had when they had ball court games. They probably had sacrificial victims as well, but the courts were, again, it was a very, very early design of maybe what soccer or basketball may have been back in that time period. The object of this game was to put the ball through the ring on the side of the wall. And so again, the rules probably did still apply to them like they did with the Mayans, where, if you lost, you probably lost more than just the game. So Tlaloc was the name of their sports game. Here's some pictures of examples of what Tlaloc may look like. This looks like it's a actual picture of some ruins of Aztecs, and maybe this would have been like what the ball field might have looked like. This is really cool. Aztecs. I want you to make sure you realize this. Aztecs, they did have the slash and burn method. Okay, so they did burn a lot of their trees to ashes, and then they would use those ashes as kind of like a fertilizer for their soil. So they did do that. They did have terraces. They did have canals, just like the other two civilizations we've already talked about. But there's one thing that was very different about these guys, the Aztecs. They created chinampas. Okay, and you can see the word right here, chinampas. And I loved saying it. Every time I got to it in class, I love saying this word. I don't know why. And so the Aztecs created chinampas on Lake Texcoco. So, remember that picture I showed you of the city of Tenochtitlan? Well, this would be like an example of what those chinampas would look like. They were called floating gardens. That's in essence what chinampas were. And what they were was, it was a large flat raft, and they anchored them to the trees or the bottoms of shallow marshlands. And the Aztecs then piled mud and dying vegetation on top of the rafts that you see right here. And they would cover them with layers of soil and planted seeds. And the rafts floated in the lake in the marsh areas. And the Aztecs used canoes to go to their floating rafts to care for their crops. So the chinampas were very successful and produced large harvests of food for the Aztecs. And so that's kind of what's going to come into play here in your challenge for this week will be about chinampas. So again, they're just like floating gardens. They're really cool. They're really cool contraption. As the Aztec civilization grew, they needed more land to grow food. And while they could have expanded to dry land, their crops would not have been protected from the outside enemy. So instead, this is why they created the chinampas, these floating gardens, because they preferred to have their chinampas close by in order to protect their food source. So they wanted to make sure that their food source were close. Some of their common foods that they were familiar with growing is down at the bottom: corn, beans, squash, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, papayas, rubber, cotton, and cocoa beans. So again, really cool agriculture there for the Aztecs. Always remember Chinampas, Aztecs, Chinampas. They had no language. I'm sorry. They did have a language. They had no alphabet. They wrote in hieroglyphics. They wrote in pictures. We already talked about that. Their language was Nahuatl. Some Aztecs words that we have gained through their early civilization was Acapulco, Mexico, avocado, chocolate, tomato. Those are all words that the Aztecs kind of came up with. They did have a type of paper that they wrote things on. It was from a fig tree, bark of a fig tree. All right, so Mayans, we didn't really know what happened with those guys because they just kind of disappeared and we had our own little thoughts about it. The Incas, Spanish just kind of took over. We already knew that. So the end of the Aztecs was very similar to the end of the Incas. So in 1519, and you can see that right here, Spanish conquistador, Spanish explorer, Hernando Cortez, he set sail for Mexico with 500 soldiers of some sort. He made landfall on the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. His reason was to find gold and to conquer the new land for Spain. So he founded a couple cities. He trained his army for battle ahead. He ordered that his ships were to be sunk so the Spanish soldiers would have no choice but have to survive. So he basically stranded his soldiers there. Cortez and his men marched to Tenochtitlan, not knowing what to expect, and Cortez was careful at first about making any contact with the native tribe there. And however, he learned that many of those people disliked the Aztecs and their ruler Montezuma. So again, remember those rebels? He learned that a lot of the neighboring people of Tenochtitlan disliked Montezuma. And so they resented the Aztec rulers. And so Cortez kind of used them to help him defeat the Aztecs. And when Cortez first encountered the Aztec Emperor Montezuma, Montezuma thought Cortez might be a god. And so a prophecy had been foretold that a god would come to the Aztecs in human form. Cortez arrived on this god's birthday. Montezuma did not trust Cortez, but he did not dare turn away someone who might be a god. And so he welcomed the Spanish into the city and he invited them into his palaces. The Aztecs were frightened by the Spanish. They were frightened by the horses. They'd never seen horses before, guns and the cannons. And many of the Aztecs thought the soldiers and they thought that Cortez and his horse were actually one creature because they'd never seen a horse before. The Spanish also brought something else with them. They brought smallpox, which was a white man's disease. And so the Aztecs people had never been exposed to this disease. And so thousands of them died with a massive smallpox epidemic that spread throughout southern Mexico, which is where they were located. Montezuma soon realized that the Spanish were after gold. He tried bribing and threatening Cortez, but Cortez took Montezuma prisoner eventually. And this would help Cortez not only take control of the empire, but he also converted its people to Christianity. So that was later the demise of the end of the Aztecs, was Hernando Cortez. Eventually, the Spanish did kill Montezuma. The Aztecs, realizing what was happening, began to fight back a little bit against the outnumbered Spanish, but eventually, to no avail, Tenochtitlan was finally captured in August of 1521. So you can see from 1519 to 1521, it really didn't take that long for Tenochtitlan to fall. And so that was kind of the end of the Aztec Empire. It's kind of sad in all reality. It really is kind of sad. So here's the deal. Okay. I think that's the end of my slides. I just told you all that. You don't need to read that again because I just told you the story. Told you all about that too. How they were able to conquer the Aztecs. Told you about the guns, the cannons, and the horses. Life after the Aztecs. Talked to you about that. I didn't realize this was all there. Okay. All right. So here's the deal. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to put myself right here in the middle so that you guys pay attention. Okay. So, you can use this information to do your Aztec chart, which I have, put on your social studies links. Okay. It's in Google Forms, or not Forms. I'm sorry. It's in Google Docs. I've already done it for you, so it's ready to go. And then my challenge for you. You ready? Okay. I'm kind of excited. I want to see what you guys come up with here. So my challenge for you guys is I want you to do a STEM challenge at home. Okay. So I want you to create yourself at home with whatever supplies you have. I want you to create a floating garden, something that floats. Remember, the Aztecs built floating gardens by weaving sticks together to create a giant raft. The giant rafts were surrounded by water in the canals. The canals enabled drainage of the wetland soils during seasonal rains. So during the dry seasons, the waters would infiltrate the flooding gardens from the canals, and the soil would absorb into the water up into the plants. Okay, so my challenge for you is using whatever you have at home, any supplies you have. I want you to try and design and build a floating garden, a chinampa. And I want you to try and test your materials that can support the weight of a garden while floating in water. You could put some soil on top of it. It's getting nice and warm outside, so go grab some dirt and see if you can make it float with the dirt on top of it. Take a bin and fill it with water, and take your floating device for your garden and see if it will float. Okay, so when you have created a successful chinampa, take a picture, drop it in Dojo, or drop it in the comments in our Google Classroom. Just something fun. It's not necessarily something you have to do, but I thought, let's try something fun. So your challenge for this week is to try and recreate a mini chinampa, something that floats, that will hold dirt. You can't just get a boat. You have to create it with stuff outside or stuff you have in your house. I'm interested to see what you guys come up with. Okay. I miss you guys. I will see most of you again over on ELA because I'm getting ready to read the next 2 chapters of Blood on the River. So make sure, if you haven't already done so, go over to ELA and get those 2 chapters read the next 2 days. I will see you probably on Wednesday when I drop the Mississippian. Okay? All right. Bye, guys. See you later.